You're listening to Bio Talk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, host of Bio Talk, and we have another interesting guest for this edition of Bio Talk. It's Dr. Andrew Lees, CEO and Chief Scientific Officer for Fina Bio Solutions, located right here in Montgomery County, Maryland. And we're just going to refer to you as Andrew or Andy?
Andrew.
Andrew will be better. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've listened to many of your bio talks, and I'm just thrilled to be a guest here.
Well, I'm sure you're going to add additional content and value that our listeners will be glad to hear from in a new sector that they may not have heard from our prior guest, Andrew.
I think that would be true.
So let's talk a little bit about you. So let's introduce yourself to the listeners about Andrew Lees and a little personal background before we get into company background.
I have a very checkered past. First, I come from a very scientific family. Both my parents were well-known scientists in their areas. My mother was the first biochemist to go to Harvard Medical School, for example. She had to take her exams separately so as not to distract the boys, of course. And she had one of the 10 most cited papers in science. And she was a founder and then later president of the American Neurochemistry Society. And I always thought my father was the famous, better-known one, but they each had their own strengths. So I grew up with an image of what a science and scientific life was going to be, and also all of those expectations that children inherit from their parents, whether they want them or not.
And what was your father's scientific background?
He was started as an aeronautical engineer, worked with Draper of the Draper Labs up in Boston. I wrote books with him, and then moved on eventually into bioengineering. So he didn't want to just spend the rest of his life putting missiles down chimneys and better. So he ended up at the Forsyth Dental Institute as a bioengineer studying the structure of teeth and bone.
So you had some big shoes to fill.
I had extremely big shoes to fill. And generally, so that was a challenge growing up. I went to Harvey Mudd College, started as an engineer until my first engineering class, then switched to chemistry, took a little break, and then went on eventually to Johns Hopkins University in biophysics, where I kind of lost some of my steam and drive and picked up an old hobby of mine as a magician. And I spent most of my graduate career as a magician working in Harbor Place restaurants. I succeeded in getting the city to change the tax laws to make table magic a non-taxable event in Baltimore restaurants. I did eventually graduate in not that much longer time than others. When I graduated, I was featured on the cover of Baltimore Magazine as 84 People to Watch. And I also had a press release that actually went on the wire services, Magician Makes Biophysicist Disappear. I had a 2-year grace period before my loans came due. They were due in the form of working in science. And I took a postdoc at the Johns Hopkins Medical School and Howard Dinsis Lab. Dr. Dinsis is most known for the one who determined which way proteins get assembled. My specialty there was long lunches and short work days, and I did very well at that goal. And then I sort of drifted into a job at the Uniformed Services University, where I was putting antibodies onto dextran polymers. And again, I was mostly absent because I could make things for immunologists that would keep them happy for months, and it would only take me a few days. So I was keeping in the vanishing
And you were
business.
paid for your absence?
I kept everybody happy. Okay. And what I discovered out of that was that putting proteins onto polymers, specifically sugar polymers, was a conjugate vaccine. So I discovered that I was, in fact, making conjugate vaccines. And so that work led to actually finding a career in something and a real interest that grabbed my heart. And that was this field of conjugation chemistry. As the nominal chemist in the group, since my undergraduate degree was in chemistry, it was my job to start working on making conjugate vaccines for the group. And there was really only one significant chemistry out there, and it was rather toxic. And so I did my specialty, and I hid and hung out in the library, and nobody could find me. And I discovered a method that had been applied in a different field, and I tried it out, and it worked for the first time.
What year was this?
This was 1983.
Okay.
1993.
Okay.
1993.
And then after you came out of hiding, what did you do with it?
Well, that was another interesting side story, which is that my wife was on bed rest. We had just moved to the D.C. area, had no real help down here. I could only work at night, so I was alone in the laboratory late at night, a no-no. Mixed A and B together, it made Jell-O, and I went home and I said, I've done it. And that was really the eureka moment that started my real career at age 40.
And so what was that eureka moment like?
That was that I had made a conjugate, that the chemicals that I used, it then took another year or so to develop that so it didn't make Jell-O, that it could be used as a vaccine. And then it very quickly, through another set of long coincidences that we don't take more than a half an hour to go through, but ended up getting licensed to Glaxo. And that made my financial life a lot easier.
For what specific indication?
They licensed it for 5 different indications: pneumococcal, meningococcal, strep, and some others.
And what year was that done?
That was the same year, 1994.
In 1994?
95.
And had you formed a company at that time, or were you an independent scientist just doing...
I was still essentially a research associate at the Uniformed Services University.
Okay, so that was licensed to GSK, but it was done through the university, of which you were able to enjoy a portion of that license fee from GlaxoSmithKline.
And at the same time, another patent that really got my introduction to the commercial world. And that got picked up by a small biotech company, Virion Systems, which is notable for having licensed the technology to MedImmune.
So how long did you stay with the university, and when did you decide that you wanted to go out on your own?
I stayed part-time, both 50-50 roughly, university and at Virion Systems, through, I believe, 99. And then they spun off another investor-funded company. The conflicts of interest just got too great, and so I had to leave the university.
And then when you left the university, what was your relationship related to the technology that you had developed while you were there?
I was still the expert, and I didn't own the patent itself. That belonged to the Henry Jackson Foundation. But I had a share in it, and I was involved in helping Glaxo to use the technology.
And what is the status with Glaxo today related to that technology?
Well, the main vaccine is strep pneumonia, and their vaccine for that is Synflorix. They took a slightly different route. They tried to leapfrog some of the areas by using a different carrier protein. So conjugate vaccines involve a protein, a polysaccharide, which is the antigen, and it's chemically linked to a protein, which is the carrier protein. So what I developed was a very simple method for doing this, which got around a lot of the other patents. So I gave Glaxo a route to coming to market without infringing anyone else's patents.
And it's ironic that today GlaxoSmithKline has their North American vaccine headquarters located in Rockville, Maryland.
That is correct, and it's somewhat more coincidental because it's named after Monsef Slaoui, and Monsef was one of the people who came to the Uniformed Services University to participate in the licensing.
How about that? This industry is always 1 degree of separation, isn't it?
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about how you evolved into Fina BioSolutions then.
Well, the company that spun out of Virion was called Biosynexis for the treatment and prevention of staph infections, and they had an antibody, prophylactic antibody for neonates where they were developing enzymes for treating staph that they were developing and needed purification. And I also, on my own at the company, my supervisor and colleague, Jimmy Mond, who I'd been with at the Uniformed Services University, was the scientific director for this. And as long as I didn't cause too much trouble, I was allowed to do a lot of playing. I did cause a lot of trouble, but I still managed to play. And I developed some additional chemistry while I was there. And during that time, I also developed a relationship with the director of the Serum Institute of India, which is the 3rd or 4th largest vaccine company in the world. And I became friends with the director. When Biosynexis started to go belly up and focus more just on the one antibody that was in clinical development, they laid off most of the researchers. And I was cheerfully laid off because I had been thinking about starting my own company. Really came to I was fighting with everybody, and I was causing a lot of trouble.
You wanted to go one direction, they wanted to go another?
No, I was just making trouble.
Oh, okay.
I didn't like the decisions that were being made, and I just was at a point where I was financially stable enough. I had enough of a skill set. I had enough of a network that I felt that I could go off on my own. Some of the things that I wanted to, this was really the first time in my life that I made a deliberate decision of a career direction. Prior to that, I just sort of drifted along from one job to the other. I wanted to make my own mistakes instead of having to rely on other people to make them for me. So I would be management instead of letting other people do that guidance. And I also, and this is really a key point, I wanted to focus on making affordable conjugate vaccines. Conjugate vaccines are among the most expensive and most complicated of the childhood vaccines. And I wanted to work with emerging market companies to help them learn to make affordable conjugate vaccines. And I recognized, not all at once, but over the years, that to bring down the price of a drug for emerging markets, you need to bring on emerging market manufacturers. And then all the regulatory stuff, price controls and all of those may or may not be effective. They're methods, but what you'll see for the price of all of the vaccines in the EPI, the expanded program of immunization that the Global Alliance for Vaccine Initiative has and WHO, that as new manufacturers come in, the prices of the vaccines drop. And this philosophy has now evolved into the very strong feeling that vaccines that every child on the planet should get should be priced on a cost-plus basis, not on whatever you can get out of the funding organizations. And so my approach to this is to make our technology widely available and to work with as many companies and to be as easy to work with as we can.
And when did you develop this passion for the emerging markets and this affordable conjugate vaccines?
This really came on essentially when I started the company because I began working with the Serum Institute of India and I began seeing what they were trying to do.
What year was that?
That was in 2006 when I started Fina BioSolutions.
And what does the name mean, Fina BioSolutions?
Fina is our family cat.
Okay.
And I happen to be very fond of rabbits, and nobody wanted it named after my rabbit, Pippin. So the vote was Fina. We looked for something that would mean something and would mean nothing.
Okay.
So Fina sounds like fine, and so it sounded like something.
Okay. And so that's been protected, and it still exists today.
Yes. The cat is still alive.
Yeah, the cat's still alive. Yes. Great. And then as you look at the evolution of Fina over time, and that's really now 13 years. Talk a little bit about the evolution of the company, where you've gone with your product development, and some of the success stories you've had.
Well, I built my success on my early career pattern of being really lazy, not being that smart about business things. Instead, what I am is very friendly and open and willing to work people. And what I've found is that I have been able to build up relationships with companies in India and in China that have been more beneficial, I think, than possible if I had been going after money. So our mission statement is doing good while having fun and trying not to go broke. We have the first two down pat. The third one is a constant struggle because we are entirely self-funded. We have no outside investors. This is me worrying about making payroll, and if it doesn't, it comes out of my own pocket.
How many people do you have now?
Well, we now have, I think, about 7 full-time employees and a couple of additional hangers-on and part-time. The idea was because I was bad at business, I turned this into a strength. I'm bad at business. I'm bad at getting big grants and big money and managing big projects. So we have grown bit by bit. And what this means is we don't have any huge contracts that if we lose it, we go out of business. Instead, we have many, many, many small contracts, small agreements. Again, by not being greedy, I was able to turn, and by being a bad business person, I was able to turn the work that we did with the Serum Institute of helping them to develop pneumococcal and meningococcal conjugate vaccines from what could have been considered a service contract into a royalty stream. And so by essentially asking a pitiful amount of money for the work because I didn't know any better and asking for very, very small royalties, I was able to translate this into something that should be a success and is about to become a success because the first vaccine, the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, is past its phase 3 trials. It's now undergoing WHO pre-qualification, and it's expected to be approved at the end of the year.
And then when you talk about small contracts, who would a typical customer be for your small contracts?
These would be companies that have an antigen and need help developing it into a vaccine. So our specialty, and we focus on we don't try to do everything. We focus on the conjugation part. So for example, a company developing vaccines for human and veterinary applications had an oligosaccharide. We spent years working with them to help them develop that. Their product eventually got licensed to, I think, Merck. And we leveraged that relationship. For example, this veterinary vaccines need to be cheap. So the protein has to be cheap. Tetanus toxoid is not inexpensive. As a result, this company was scouring the world for sources for tetanus toxoid. So in our lab, we got to evaluate almost a dozen different tetanus toxoid sources. So we've a poster that will be on our website soon showing this evaluation that And this was a unique opportunity. There was no money in it in particular. And we volunteered actually to make extra conjugates just so that we could evaluate, because we thought this would be a very valuable contribution to the vaccine world.
And so you're going through phase 3 clinical trials, you say, right now?
Not us. So we don't do any clinical work. We don't really do discovery work, and we don't do clinical work because those are really expensive. So we work with companies that are trying to move out of the laboratory towards phase 1. And we can also help them with their documentation for their phase 1. And we've done this with a number of
And you're providing the
groups.
conjugates.
Right. So we will provide for the methodology and the documentation to transfer to their CMO.
And it is your long-term vision that you'll never develop your own vaccines that will go on the market under the Fina name?
No.
Okay.
What we are doing in that area, and this is really a major expense and a new area for us, is that working with PATH, which is an NGO that receives a lot of money from the Gates Foundation, among others, they provided us a small contract to try to make the most widely used carrier protein used in conjugate vaccines, because hitherto it had been extremely expensive and difficult to get with onerous licensing. So they wanted to have a low-cost access to it. And at the time, no one else had been able to make this protein called CRM197 in E. coli as a soluble protein. Scientist in my lab, who was, I said, laid off from one of the major companies in the area, started in my laboratory as a volunteer and has worked her way up to being a star scientist, Natalia Oganyesan. She developed everything from the molecular biology, the fermentation, the purification, and the formulation. I know that Merck and GSK and the Serum Institute and others have all tried to do this in E. coli. She succeeded by herself.
And so they've taken notice of what she's accomplished?
Yes.
In what way?
We get a lot of interest from other companies from it. The market's not just as simple as, Pfizer will now buy it from us. Right. That doesn't really happen in this. But they certainly know that we have it available. We are seeking new entrants to the conjugate vaccine field. So companies that have an antigen, need a carrier protein, we can provide them with easier access. And there are now other companies selling this protein. Our advantage is that as this not-for-much profit company, we don't have to make money for other people. So we can look at the long-term picture of how we want to finance and get paid, and we're looking for a long-term relationship. And we are the only company that has the conjugation expertise. So we are a conjugation vaccine R&D company, whereas the other companies are suppliers.
And with your R&D, is your research always done in collaboration with or for another company, or is there any that you do that is pure basic research for Fina?
We do our own basic research, and this is because it's a company full of scientists. We like to play, and I really encourage people to try small projects. And we are now expanding the CRM197 strain because we have found that it's very good at expressing a number of other proteins, and we think it has great potential for that. That's challenging to move forward, but it's a very exciting area, and that's under Natalia's supervision.
And I see you have a passion for the science, and I don't see you as one of the typical entrepreneurs that we do on BioTalk that's looking for the exit strategy right now.
That's correct.
You're not looking for exit, so what are you looking for in life?
I would say happiness.
Yeah? What would make you happy?
But running a company is a lot like banging your head against the wall a lot. So I don't know that that's kind of the new motto that I'm moving towards, because there's a lot of pressure to grow because you need to do more. But once you start to grow, you lose all of the benefits of being a small company where there are few rules and you can do a lot of playing. So what we're trying to do is to become sustainable. And the motto that I have now is to create a sustainable company where people would like to work even if they didn't have to work.
Okay. Including yourself.
Well, I'm already there.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And to give scientists an opportunity to grow and develop and to have a lot of control over their own life. I can't afford to pay my scientists enough. I give them freedom and opportunity. Didn't mention another element of starting my own company is I wanted a place where I would want to work. And I did notice that I make a really lousy employee. And so I make a great collaborator, because it's always more fun to help people with their work than do what you're supposed to do. And I try to create that environment for my employees. So if they have a friend who needs some help, sure, help them. We have our little specialty niche area in conjugation and now in protein purification and expression. And so a lot of people, molecular biologists, for example, they're not going to have that experience. So it's easy for us to help them and have a little collaboration.
And so you're creating a little Bell Laboratories for the bio industry where there's a lot of freedom and flexibility for the scientists to do their work.
Absolutely. Yes. I really try to have fun. And I like toys and I like tools. So when you come out to visit the lab, you'll see this place is just stuffed with equipment.
So that's where your cash goes and profits goes back into...
It all goes back into the
new
company.
toys for the laboratory.
Yes. Coming back to the carrier protein, the CRM197, trying to bring it to clinical manufacture with no money has been challenging. What I've done is we gave Path a non-exclusive license for use in low-income countries. Mm-hmm. And in turn, they gave us some money, not enough, but some money to help us move it into GMP manufacture. And we are now working with the former director from the Serum Institute, who has a facility out in Seattle called InventPrize, and he has a license, a more limited license. So he has his own interest in this. So we are working together now. So I've basically made money appear out of nowhere to start moving this into GMP, and it's all gone very well. The process that Natalia developed works phenomenally well.
You said it's going well, but there's not enough money to get you to GMP.
It is. It's just that we had to do this other licensing arrangement in order to generate...
To fill the gap.
Yeah, because now they have an interest in doing it for themselves. And so as a result, they get the money from Path as well for their own development.
So for our listeners, I'm talking to Dr. Andrew Lees, who's the CEO, Chief Scientific Officer for Fina Bio Solutions, and he really has a business model that is very unique, might not be for a lot of the other listeners that are listening right now as to how to develop and go into business, and has different personal goals than a lot of entrepreneurs would have. So I congratulate you on what your personal mission and vision is, and hope that you can get affordable conjugate vaccines to those emerging countries that really need them badly.
It is happening because the pneumococcal vaccine from the Serum Institute will be the lowest cost vaccine for pneumo. The current one is around $3.25 for Gavi countries. This will be $2 a dose. And the meningococcal is in, I believe, is starting phase 3 this year, and that will come to market as the lowest cost meningococcal.
So you mentioned sometimes that you're lazy, don't like to work, and take a break, but I see you at every event that there is within this region, so that you don't rest much. You make sure that you appear everywhere, right?
I like schmoozing.
You like schmoozing, okay.
I see me working the event, but I'm not in the lab working.
Gotcha. Are you on the bench anymore?
Yes, some. Not a lot, but
Not
some.
a lot.
Part of what allowed the company to grow from 1 or 2 people was when I started to hire people who could work on their own. And I say, because I'm a bad manager, I need people who know what to do, not who just will do what you tell them, because I can't figure out what to tell them. I have a sign on my door that says, "Oh, poop. Yeah. You did it just like I told you to."
Right.
And so the rule is, if I tell you to do something, don't do it.
Don't do it
until you understand why I asked you to do it and how it's really going to work, because there's a good chance I forgot something.
And I see every year at our BioHealth Capital Region Forum, and we talk about this area is a great area for certain industries and sectors within the biohealth industry. It's extremely strong in vaccines, I would think. So tell me how it is for Fina to function within the BioHealth Capital Region and for you to get access to the resources, scientists, and everything else you need to grow your business.
Well, it is a great area. We're located out on the Shady Grove near a few blocks from the National Cancer Institute. And I located there in part because I had been working there before and also because I ride my bike to work, and that's as far as I can bike in an hour. But it's just part of Montgomery County and this area. They do have a nice bike path. I can safely get there. And the particular area of the Shady Grove between Key West and GSK is just packed with biotech companies. And because I don't drive very much, I like to be able to walk to things. So there are a lot of companies that I can just walk to. When I go out for lunch, I'm going to be seeing people from other companies. And so there are a lot of resources.
So you're saying you're in the Cambridge district of Montgomery County?
I think so.
I haven't heard it described that way.
I think I like the high density of companies. Just in my building, there's probably 20 companies. Just looks like a nondescript office building. There used to be an old GSK facility. So I sublet to several other companies that complement what we do. One is Rick Schumann, Antibody Immunoassay Consultants, who's a master making monoclonal antibodies. So we trade services. The weird one is a Chinese-owned bread ingredients company developing enzymes of value to the food industry. So it's molecular biology. So it looks like a molecular biology lab, except they have a dough maker. And so I helped. We work together. We use many of the same strains and equipment.
So you have your own little mini incubator over there.
And I also recently started working with an immunohistochemistry company that's from China. And the guy moved from Cambridge to work with us, and he's now moved next door, but we're co-developing products together that are based on our polymer technology.
And do you travel to India and China frequently?
Well, I'm going to Bio, come back on Thursday evening, and Friday I'm going to India for 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
This comes up, another part of this collaborative. We work with a lot of vendors. And this comes in part from my goofing off, because back when I was just sitting around with only goofing off, I used to make balloon animals for vendors, and they would always like to come around. So I have a lot of friends, and I really appreciate the challenge that vendors and technical sales reps have. So we made a lot of friends. So for example, the Lab Owl group with fermenters, made friends with them. I was making balloon animals, and their CEO juggles. They came around. After a number of years, we bought a system from them. We're a beta site from them. So we get lots and lots of support. For this particular trip to India, I give talks. Bio-Rad invited me to give talks at their IBBR seminars. And we have a project, and now they're taking me to India to give talks. We're also visiting many of the clients and new clients that I would like to meet while I'm there as well.
So dual purpose for your trip.
That's right, yeah.
And so when you go to Bio next week, which everybody's interested in, and this will probably air during Bio, tell me what you're looking to do and accomplish at Bio next week.
The main thing is meeting people and learning, and looking for people who we can help, who we can interact with, and so generate collaborations, and also looking for those few people that might want to actually buy something from us. We are, through a kind of coincidence, we do have a full-page ad in every issue of Bio. This is part of having no management and decisions getting made quickly without a lot of thought. But an opportunity came up, and we'll also have a news story on the front page of one of the...
So in every day's issue of the Bio magazine, you'll have a full-page ad.
We'll have an ad, and then one day there'll be a story. So I'm hoping that we can find those half a dozen people or something that have a real interest in this CRM 197 carrier protein.
Are you going to take advantage of the partnering meetings or do everything through the Maryland Pavilion?
We're partnering. That gives me a chance to search for the other companies. I have a lot of... The principal reason is for this carrier protein. When I find companies with other areas that might be of interest, then it's an opportunity to meet with them. My general approach to these schmooze fest that you said I show up with so frequently is to look at them as schmoozing and not as hustling. Schmoozing is when you go and you talk to somebody and you try to learn about them. And sometimes you find something, but as a minimum, you're going to learn something, and you're going to see somebody else's passion. Hustling is where you're trying to sell them something. And if they don't have what you want, you're gone.
Yeah, and basically, too many Americans try to hustle too much in India and China and don't want to build the relationships that are necessary, and they walk away frustrated and say, well, that market's not for me.
Yeah, it took probably 4 or 5 years to start in India and to build up a relationship. If I hadn't met with a person, it probably never would have happened. Each of my trips, and I had done an Indian tour just before I started with Paul Life Sciences, and I got to go around to all these vaccine companies at that time. And I've done the same in China. So it was a long term for China. It would involved, I had helped a friend look for a job. And years later, we stayed in touch, and he was director of the Conjugate Vaccine program at the Chengdu Institute. So we had a very nice ongoing long-term relationship with them now. They've sent scientists to our lab for training. I go over there regularly, and they're really moving along.
So it's the 2 Ps, patience and persistence, right?
Absolutely. This comes where I don't have to look for money in every interaction. An area that I'm very excited about working in that I had never heard of before is in the area of vaccines for opioid abuse. This is a hot area right now. And using the NIH database, just searching for the code word conjugate, and I found, people doing opioid vaccines. I emailed each. I offered to provide them our protein for free. We're now working as collaborators with all of the major groups. Each of them has gotten significant NIH funding now, and we're part of that.
Well, how about you going after NIH funding directly?
I think you didn't listen well. I said I was really bad at writing and grant writing.
I understand that, but we have people that can help you do that. That's where BHI might...
That would be an area.
So we should talk about that.
It should be an area.
Seriously, because we know that there's a lot of money for opioid abuse right now. NINDS and NIAID and everybody, and there's pools of money, and they're not getting quality proposals.
We are working with some of those, and what I've found is I'm a much better co-PI than PI. That's been my experience trying to write grants. Spend a lot of work and you don't get anything. I do need help. You asked me, how can BHI help? That would be one way. I would say growing, as you continue to grow the ecosystem, here so that there are more companies for me to schmooze with and interact and see how we can work together is a great way. You and BHI have done a great job. Really been impressed with what the team has done here, and it's really, I think, changed how it works.
Well, thank you for your perception on that. You actually answered one of my next questions, but I'm going to skip and go to something else and say, normally I ask about the personal and corporate goals that somebody would have, but really I'm just going to say, we've talked a little bit about what some of your personal and corporate goals are, but what's Andrew Lee basically going to say is success? When will you know this is it? I've made it. I've accomplished what I need to in life. I can sit back and relax.
Well, there are a lot of ways of looking at it. One is about before I started my company. I was a success then. And
you were ready to retire. You
could have retired,
then.
But that seemed like a bad idea.
Right.
I would say in terms of the company, the first thing is becoming sustainable so I don't have to keep worrying about every payroll personally. And they have just-in-time inventory. We operate on the just-in-time accounts receivable.
I understand.
So that would be one thing. And we're expecting that to happen this year. As the first vaccine gets approved in India, we will be sustainable from that. We have our protein, which we're looking to both sell and license. And we also have a product line. We didn't talk about this at all, but I recognized early on in the company that we needed service work goes up and down, and we needed products. So I had spent a good part of my career working with putting proteins onto dextran polymers. So we started a business selling modified dextran polymers. And this is has become a very successful business. We take our toys and tools from the conjugate vaccine field and apply them to
Is that a separate business?
Well, I would like them to be, but right now I need to suck the money out of the polymer business.
One's the cash cow to feed the other one. I got you.
And they're very interactive because we use the same equipment and really the same people. It started when we would make polymers when we didn't have contracts. So from my point of view, there was no cost of goods. I had to pay the people anyway. And we have now built up a very substantial business in polymers. We supply polymers to some of the largest flow cytometry companies, some of the largest bead companies in the world. We have supplied them for a clinical trial as an ingredient, not as a GMP. And we have a very steady business selling to researchers around the world. I think the only continent that we haven't shipped to is Antarctica yet. And I'd say FedEx and the internet came along at just the right time to make us an intergalactic business.
So if you stayed with your core business, you'd be sustainable now if you didn't have the passion for coming up with affordable conjugate vaccines for the emerging world.
Yes, that's correct.
But it's nice that you have that passion. We need people like you to do that.
Yes. So the polymer business functions more like a standard business. We make things and we sell them. That's an area where I know that it can grow a lot more. We have so much potential in it. We have many unique products that we have made from vaccine business that we've been able to apply to these. And we really need some marketing muscle. I don't have the money to do that yet.
I understand. You will, though.
I will have
when you
it.
get to that sustainability with your India contract.
I'm waiting for myself to be cloned.
Well, there are other people that can help you.
I know that, but my wife won't let them.
Okay. Now that's the real secret we haven't talked about. So in closing, we've talked about a lot. We've just touched the surface on a lot of the things that you're doing and want to do. Maybe there'll be a follow-up after you get to that next stage in your evolution, which we can talk about. But any closing comments you have for our listeners?
The approach that I've taken to running a company is being open and sharing. And what I really like about the model that I've been able to do, and I recognize it's not one that everybody can do, is that allows me to look at the longer term, look at relationships rather than looking at interactions in a transactional way. And the plus to that is it actually allows me to do better and grow the company better, and interact with a lot of really, really interesting people. Those interesting people are right here in the biohealth region.
No, that's super. Well, I think the key is once you find a formula that works, you stick with it. And so you've got one now that's been working for 13 years, and there's no reason to change. So we've been talking with Dr. Andrew Lees, who's the CEO and Chief Scientific Officer as well as founder of Fina Bio Solutions. Going to see him up in Bio in the Maryland Pavilion next week. So we hope that we both have a successful trip to Philadelphia and bring some of that money back to Montgomery County.
I hope so.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.